So, hello everybody. Yes. So just a small thing. Hello, Lily. Yes. Let's just check. Does everybody know how to raise a hand? Because we may start going onto two screens. And so if you go bottom right, you'll find a little thing labeled reactions with a smiley face on it. And if you click on it, there'll be a thing labeled raise hand, like I've just done. And if you click on it again, you can lower your hand. So just check you can do that, because that's great. People are finding it. If we're on one screen, if you wave at me, I'll probably see. But if we go onto two screens, then I might miss you unless we raise hands. Good. Oh. Okay, and can you lower them again? That's let's see, just click it again to put it down again. That's it. Let me see, it's arrived. Good. So, where are you in the world? Let's just wave a hand if you're in the UK. Anyone in the UK? Kathy, hello, Kathy.
Hello.
Al and Anita, yes. And Lucia, hello, Lucia. Yes. Who's in Germany? I've seen Astrid. Anyone else here? Oh, and Mika, yes. Yeah, lovely. And Denmark, we have Soren. Do we have anyone else from Denmark? And anyone else from elsewhere in Europe? Not today.
Well, I'm from the Middle East, I guess. I'm from Tel Aviv.
Ah, right. Okay. Well,
Would like to think we're Europeans here.
Yes, why not? Absolutely. Honorary Europeans. And who's from the USA? Lots of people from the USA. Great. Welcome, all of you. Anyone from South America today? Don't know that we've got any South Americans today. Australia, not Australia at this hour. Yeah. Anyone I haven't mentioned? Any countries we haven't mentioned? It's lovely. Zoom is amazing. Zoom is just amazing. So it's FM's birthday today. He will be 153. So shall we raise him a toast with whatever water receptacle you have to hand? Happy birthday, FM, and thank you for everything. Amazing, his legacy. I wonder if you would guess. So yeah, the next one is who's got a copy of my book? Hands up if you've got a copy. People flashing it, yeah. And who hasn't? Who hasn't got one yet? A few people who haven't. Yeah, that's fine. Absolutely. Okay. Most of you here at Alexander Teachers, is anyone not an Alexander teacher or trainee? Just Owen, hello, and Suzanne and Anita and the other Suzanne. Yep, that's lovely. And do you tell me how much you know? Do you, if you don't know anything at all about the Alexander technique, put up your hand.
I've had lessons for 8 years.
Right. Lovely.
With my teacher in St. Albans.
Nice. Yeah.
Once a week.
Lovely. Brilliant. Yeah.
So
Anyone?
quite a lot, actually.
Quite a lot. Yeah, that is. That's a lot of lessons. You'll be really taking it into yourself at that point. Yeah. It gets precious, doesn't it?
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Anyone not really know anything very much about the technique at all? Just to ask that. So those of you who are pupils or non-teachers. Good. So everybody has a level starting point. Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes about how this all came about and the path to the book, what happened. and then we'll open it up to general discussion. So I started as a zoologist. I read zoology, and I was a whole animals person. The minute the animal was dead, I wasn't interested. I wanted to know about their behavior, ecology, and evolution. And then I started a PhD, and my back seized up, and that's what took me to the technique. And that was it. I fell out with science and set about finding a place to train. And my first teachers were Carrington teachers. So lots of lovely, gentle work, lots of unwinding, beautiful work that really sorted the crisis I was in. And then I went to London to sit on the doorsteps of schools, and eventually found Misha's school, which was McDonald. So I swapped to McDonald teachers at that point. So lots of strong pulls and going up furiously. And Misha's was lovely, very vibrant, lots of very energized work. And he really built a lot of confidence in people. And the first term of my training, I put on half a stone, 7 pounds, 3.5 kilos, however you weigh. But people kept telling me I was looking slimmer, and I realized it had gone on as muscle on my back. So I got stronger, even that very first term. And everything progressed well. And I came out after my training, built a practice. And after 6 months, everything fell apart. I just couldn't cope. I somehow wasn't coping with pupils. And I realized I didn't really know how to look after myself. With all that training and different teachers, nothing had prepared me really to look after myself. So that's when I realized I needed new input, and that's what took me to Miss Goldie, who wasted no time. Does everybody know who Miss Goldie is? Does anyone not know who Miss Goldie is? Yes, okay. Miss Goldie, Julie and Owen too. Yes, she was one of Alexander's first trainees. She joined him back in 1927 before the first training course. She helped run the little school for him, and she was probably closest to him than anybody. She worked alongside him for 30 years. People thought they were lovers, but I think they weren't, but she was totally in love with him. He was her, her God, her master, whatever. He was, guru. She protected his memory furiously. And she lost no time in telling me what a mess I was. And because she was known for having rather a sharp tongue. And her favorite phrase to me was, if I asked her a question, "You ask me that? And you call yourself a teacher of the Alexander technique? Why, Mr. Alexander would be turning in his grave if he could see what you were doing in the name of his technique," which is not what I would say to a new teacher. But I'd learned along the way how to let insults shed off me. And so I let the insults shed off and listened for the message underneath. And the message underneath was, you're a mess. You don't know anywhere near as much as you think you know. You're weak. Your back is weak, and I'm going to sort you out. And I thought, that's good enough for me. So I withstood the insults, which came very regularly, because I felt I was in good hands. I knew I was a mess. So within a couple of lessons, she had collapsed my back, that beautifully strong back that I thought I'd got. She discovered was a fix. And within not very long, I was back in a slump. And then she started rebuilding me. It was like she just took everything away that I already knew. And she set about building it in such a different way, really from the core, really in an integrated way. And it was about 6 months before I could really sit up again. And it was so different. And I didn't understand why at that point. But she gave me real strength that came with coordination and flexibility, because we tend to think of strength and flexibility as two different things, and coordination is different again. And she gave it to me all together. And my whole body was strong. And after that, I could throw a ball in a straight line for the dog, which I'd never been able to do before, and with some power behind it, which was amazing. So all sorts of amazing things happened through that. At the same time, she was bringing me to quiet. She was seeing the high level of agitation in my system. And her big sentence was, come to quiet, stop doing your thing. And she wanted me to come present. She didn't want me just doing the technique out of habit. She wanted me to come present to what was happening and to stop. And the first time I managed that, it was with my kettle. I was about to lift my kettle and I thought, no, stop. And I came to quiet, like she said, and I just saw the kettle. And then I gave myself consent to move, and something completely different happened. My hand moved in a way it had never moved before. And, oh yes, if everybody who isn't muted could mute, please, just to stop background noise. Anita, that's it, thank you. My hand moved in a totally different way. My whole body followed it in a different way. I was aware of the weight of the kettle and responding to it as I picked it up. And so I lost no time in telling her next week what had happened. And it turned out that's what she wanted me to find. She said this was Alexander's discovery process. And it's actually described in Use of the Self, where that key moment where he's trying to speak in a different way, but every time he tries, he pulls his head back again. And he plays this game, if you remember, where he says, now I'll speak, no, I won't. I'll raise my hand, no, I won't. I'll do nothing. And eventually his nervous system calms down, and then the speaking happens in a different way. And she said that the technique had been turned on its head, that now we learn the primary control. You take your neck free, your head forward and up to let your back lengthen and widen, and then you keep that going while you move. And she wanted the process the other way up. She wanted me to come to quiet in this responsive way that when I then moved, my neck did free, my head did go forward and up, my back did lengthen and widen, so that every moment one is rediscovering the technique. And it's a discovery process. It's so different. And I had always asked, how did FM discover the technique? And I'm sure a lot of you have asked the same thing, because, you know, we all went to somebody else to have hands put on us, but there was nobody to put hands on FM. So how did he do it? And I've been asking that right from the beginning. And I remember asking in a training course I'd been visiting. And this head of training said to me, well, Alexander was an awfully clever man. We can't do that. And I thought, fudge, you don't know. And now I started to get an inkling as to how Alexander had done it, part of the key. So I worked with her for 4 years. She also, as I say, there was this different way of understanding the technique. She seemed to have a different biomechanical model, the way she'd rebuilt my body in a different way, but she was putting me into different shapes than anyone else had done. She was doing things with my shoulders nobody had done. She was doing moves I'd never met, asking me to do moves. And, you know, I'd worked with all those different teachers, and yet none of them had done this stuff. So it set me on a 30-year journey to understand why her work was so different and so strong and so integrating, and how could one communicate this to anybody? So this discovery journey took me first back to John Hunter, who'd been the main trainer on my training school. He'd worked a lot with Goldie, and he was why I went to Goldie in the first place, because he was asking these questions as well. And he put on a series of workshops trying to explore what was so different. He'd also then worked with Erica Whitaker, another one of those very first trainees. And that then took me to Erica herself, and she introduced me to just look at what you're doing and then let your eyes lead you over there. And again, that let the body move in a different way. So there was another clue. And I was already doing natural vision technique, Bates work. So I was already clued into the eyes as important. And I then found my way to Peter Grunwald, who's taken that to another level of integrating how the eyes lead the body. I then discovered Bob Britton's work and functional anatomy. I'd always found anatomy totally boring because, you know, this muscle does this and this muscle does this and this muscle, nothing joins up in it. It's just itsy bitsy. And suddenly here was Bob Britton showing how anatomy joins up. And that was very intriguing. I liked that. I went to Jessica Wolfe on breathing. I was already working a lot with natural breathing following Goldie's and John's work. And it was great to see Jessica Wolfe's take on it. I discovered craniosacral therapy, and that introduced me to the whole world of fascia and how everything connects to everything, the concept of tensegrity, for those of you who know that word. Thomas Myers's work and the myofascial trains, where he takes functional anatomy and puts it into lines of pull through the body. And that made a lot of sense to me of starting to explain our work. I went to Philip Shepherd. I worked with his work for 8 years, still do. His deep embodiment work, instead of saying, I am looking after my body, he's saying, we are the body. We are an integrated unit. It's not brain and body. We are one intelligence. He really brings one into the intelligence of the body. And that's something that Goldie talked about, was having intelligent knees and letting the whole body come intelligent. And that came from Alexander, apparently. So many avenues started to come together, and it all seemed to link back to what Miss Goldie was doing. But there was still something missing. We moved to Ireland in 2004, and a year later I fell very ill, and I was pretty well bedbound and certainly housebound for over a year, and very contracted. It was very painful, very frightening, and afterwards I very much needed to put myself back together and build strength again. And I used Goldie, what I'd learned from Miss Goldie, coming to quiet, letting the right thing do itself, and began to be able to calm the nervous system and bring my alignment and my presence back. But I couldn't find the strength through that. I went swimming and I started yoga, and those both helped to build the strength. But I kept thinking, you know, Goldie had such strength, and so do Erica and all those first generation teachers. They were so strong. How do I find the strength in this? Then I did a workshop in Berlin, and Rosa Luisa Rossi came to it, and she came afterwards to work with me for a week in Ireland, and she'd heard of Jando Masuero, and she suggested I look at his work on the initial Alexander technique. So he'd been asking the same questions. Jando is a teacher in France, and he'd been asking from the beginning, who was Delsarte? How did Alexander develop the technique? He translated Alexander's books into French, so he had a very, very good knowledge of Alexander's work. And he discovered this mysterious business card that a lot of people had seen, saying that Alexander, back in 1904, had trained in the Delsarte method. What is the Delsarte method? Well, what was around at the time as Delsarte, it's still popular in America today, is totally somatic. It doesn't seem to make any link to Alexander. And then Delsarte's work started to be published in French. And Jando, of course, being French, was the right person to read it. And he started to find a mosaic of clues that led him back to, in relation to the mosaic of clues in Alexander's early writings, he started to put together how Alexander must have used pulls on himself that teachers do on us. We have our necks pulled up and our elbows pulled out. And he must have learned how to do this for himself. And Jando has managed to recreate that. And he's called it the initial Alexander technique. So I took lessons with Jando, and he works on Zoom. And he was waiting, that whole first lesson, he was waiting for me to walk out on him, because so many senior teachers have walked out on him, because it's such unfamiliar work. It's these strong self-pulls, and it feels all wrong. When he's brought up in the modern technique, which is so gentle and non-doing, suddenly it sort of feels far too doey. And indeed, my head was saying, this is all wrong, this isn't Alexander technique. And then I noticed that what he was getting me to do was what Goldie had done for me. He was taking me in these strange, unfamiliar positions and bringing about the same use that she was bringing about. So at which point I was hooked. I thought, this man's onto something here. So I worked with him for a year, and it indeed has helped me, has really given me the key of how Goldie understood the biomechanics of the body. And of course, she got that from Alexander. And the evidence that Jando has showed is all in Alexander's pictures, in the photographs of him. And he's also about a reasoning process. He's very much interested in constructive conscious control. And that whole phrase, all together, one after another, of how we give the directions. And through that work, I found my strength again. Not merely found my strength, but it brought back an elasticity into me. And I was leaping around feeling like an 8-year-old again, which, having had twice, actually, 3 years of not being able to walk, was just amazing. I could not have done that shot without that work. I spent an hour leaping the rock to get that picture. So it was very exciting. And I started to feel I got the whole picture. I then started to match what Jando had done. I started to say, okay, so what's the functional anatomy behind that? To work that with Maya's anatomy trains, find some other fascial trains that I discovered as well. And then also I was asking, as I'd been asking for a long time, okay, so what's the science behind this? Because it was so precise and my science head had woken up. I felt that with Goldie's work was so precise in the way it brought one to quiet and the way it then brought about such wonderful, precise, coordinated use from the nervous system, coordinating a new use of the muscles. I thought there has to be science here. So that started me into a whole journey of reading neuroscience and reading biomechanics, which is pretty hard going, and to start to put things together. And then I spent 4 years doing nothing else but writing the book, more or less teaching my lessons, and it was hard work, and we got there. So, and then I taught it online when COVID broke. Then I launched Training to Teach Online, which a few of you here have done, working with teachers, and the whole thing refined again. So here we are, and with the book, part 1 sets the scene of what the fundamental biomechanics are, how the whole thing links together, not merely because movement isn't just about muscles and fascia and bones, it's also about our sensory processes, our thinking processes, our embodiment processes, and the consciousness processes, and how the whole system can self-organize. Because I think that's one of the big things Alexander discovered. And, Jando has a more mechanical approach because he is at root a mathematician and an engineer, and I'm a zoologist. I want to know how dogs keep their necks free. Because if you think about a cat chasing a mouse and stalking a mouse, the cat sees the mouse, and the very sight of the mouse draws that crouch out of the cat, and then draws the stalk, and then draws the stop, and the cat is gauging it all the time. It's not a reflex approach. As for a long time they thought, oh yes, it's reflexes, that sort of thing. It isn't. It's whole body intelligence that draws the cat through that whole process, and in the end lands on the mouse, and there's her dinner. It's a whole set of fundamentals of movement all working together. And that's why the book is called The 12 Fundamentals of Movement, because, it's not just one factor, it's this whole set of factors. And, Alexander's discovery that I rediscovered with my kettle is that the whole body will self-organize. That's what the primary control is. You let your eyes lead, you let your head lead, and the body self-organizes to follow. The book also gives a new history of the technique, because, Alexander's own account is in use of the self, that wonderful first chapter where he describes how he evolved the technique. And it's a great story, but we now know it is a story, because many years ago now it was discovered that actually he started as a breathing man. He lost his voice, but he then worked with what he called natural elocution. He was teaching people natural breathing and natural speaking. And then from there, he started to become aware the rest of the body was involved, and he moved to London and discovered new concepts like kinesthesia and mechanical advantage. And by 1911, you got what looked like the Alexander technique. The Alexander technique had formed by then. But it was very different in that Alexander wasn't using his hands. He was just using them as a guide. But the real process was constructive conscious control. He was telling the pupil what directions to think, and he was using his hands to guide them a bit, but he didn't see his hands as doing anything. And then somewhere between 1912 and 1914, he realized that if he put the same level of conscious quiet and presence into his hands, or sent his directions, the Alexander thinking process into his hands, he could then work through the pupil, and he could communicate the whole thing through his hands. And that was great for him for several reasons. Firstly, it saved his temper. Because apparently he used to shout at his pupils because they didn't get what he was saying. And he didn't have at that point the science that we've now got to explain it. He couldn't explain what faulty sensory perception was and why they should put themselves in these strange positions that he's asking. And so to get the pupils out of the way and just to be able to do it for them was a tremendous relief. I think it also probably brought him in more money because it looked cleverer. And it also meant that people couldn't steal his work, which was a huge importance to him, because there he was, a nobody in London, in Edwardian London. And the doctors he was very aware that the doctors could have run off with his work. So for various reasons, I think he wanted to he enjoyed that move to hands. And gradually it became more and more about hands. And Lully Westphelt writes in about 1934, during the first training course, he says one day, "I can get it for them completely now with my hands." And she said after that, she never saw him lose his temper again. It was good news. But I think for us, something got lost. And again, through this process, we've come full circle and come back to how to instruct the technique entirely without hands, should one wish to, or to use your own use better if you want to use hands. But I think we've come full circle, and we can now teach the technique online or hands off, because with this much more precise instruction that's come through the understanding of the functional anatomy and the science and so on, you can explain it to pupils, and one can actually now do Alexander's original brief, which is teach people how to do it for themselves. And so, I was able to recreate what Goldie did for me by myself here in the west of Ireland. Had I lived still in London, I probably wouldn't have done that. I'd have just gone to schools and had good lessons from good teachers. But because, those of us who live in far-flung places have to find other ways, and here it is. So I think I've talked enough at this point. Over to you all. Who would like to set the ball rolling with the first question? From anything you've heard or today, or from Robert Rickover's podcast that I did, or from the book. What struck you there? Sensible or outrageous? Annabelle, yes.
Unmute. There we are. Hello.
Hello.
You mentioned the Frenchman that you talked about. I didn't catch his name, and I'd like to get it properly.
Yes, I'll put it in the chat. It's Jando Massuero. Massuero, that's him. And
Great.
yes.
Lovely. Thank you.
Yes, there's lots of his stuff on YouTube. you have to be quite patient going through it. But it's long-winded. But it's so I've tried to make it's quite very different. And in my book, I've tried to make a bridge. There's several chapters that really deal with his work, and I've tried to make more of a bridge between his work and the rest of the technique, and bring the breathing into it, bring it more from the core rather than a rather imposed thing. So I use his work pure, but I also sort of make it more bridged to the rest of the technique, because I think that's important.
Right.
Who else would like? Anita, can I see a hand up there? Yes.
Me?
No, it's me.
Stephen, yes. Yeah.
All right. So, is there a way you could talk about how you might present Alexander's work to a new group of people who'd never heard of it? I mean, Alexander is the best kept secret, seems to me.
It really is, isn't it? Isn't this the one of the questions we're all asking all the time? I always actually start when I present to a group of beginners. I sometimes do talks in the library locally, and I always start by getting them just to move on and off a chair and in pairs and observe how they do it, because I think it's so important that they start by waking up their proprioception, that sense of where the body is and where it is in space and what it's doing, because the average member of the public doesn't know their arse from their elbow, if I can put it in the vernacular. And to wake up, where is my back, where is my neck, and what is that neck doing, and then to get them to put it into words as well. Oh yes, that's my neck and it's pulling back, and that's my shoulder and it's raised or it's forwards. I think that's something that wasn't happening 100 years ago, getting the pupil to verbalize their own process. And to me, actually, it's incredibly important for the modern pupil, because, I think the days when we could expect a pupil to turn up, stand in front of the chair, be worked on in a way they don't understand, and come week after week after week. Certainly young people, they don't want to do that. They want something that's much more interactive, much more dynamic, and sends them away with the sense of agency that they can, I've shown them how to free their neck, they can go away and do it for themselves. And, so that's where I start, is getting them to discover what they're doing at the moment, because why should they free their neck if they don't know it's tight? And then I can teach them the processes I give in the book, the raindrop, just thinking to roll a raindrop down the nose, which starts to just bring in the natural balance of the head, and then using the eyes to coordinate the balance of the head. And they're such simple things, and they make such a profound difference. And the best advert for the technique is people feeling its power in that sort of simple way, isn't it? So that's what I always try and do in an introductory workshop, and people are often quite blown over by how they feel at the end of the workshop. Have you done an introductory workshop at this point? Because I know you're a relatively new teacher. You haven't. You're muted still, Anita.
I'm a new teacher.
Yes. So again, the book very much does give a format that you can use. I mean, at the start of COVID, there were a lot of teachers who were working in university situations, particularly in the States, but also in Britain in the drama schools, who had been told, you've got to take all your work online tomorrow, and had no model to do it by. And they were taking the book, or at that point, the Training to Teach Online course, and just rolling it out as was to their students, and it worked. Somebody else was taking it into schools on the same basis. So it is, this work is also giving you a more structured teaching program, should that be something you need. And of course, that's fluid, because the last thing we want in the technique is a structured training program that is always the same, but it gives you something that is a basis for a structured program that you can then, of course, mix and match and meet the pupil's needs in that moment. You can change the program at any moment. And that's totally crucial. But one can have more of a structure to work from. How does that sound to people? Because that's maybe an unfamiliar concept for us. Modern technique. Does anyone want to shout out about that? for being very polite. Arwen, you've got your hand up.
I can ask a question about that actually as a fairly young student, with a younger, almost student, or my teacher. In having a structured work, how does that balance with what I'm seeing Walter Carrington and some of those very early teachers say about the pupil recognizing what they're ready for and kind of reflecting it up to the teacher, who then says, oh, this is what you're ready for, and teaches them what they're kind of starting to recognize they're ready to learn.
Yes, I think I think that still goes on. I think it can go on over a much shorter time frame. I mean, like teaching breathing really went out. I mean, I know Carrington is on record somewhere as saying, oh, just let breathing look after itself. And one of the reasons I think that happened was that nobody picked up on mind in the brain, which was a concept I got from Goldie. And it's there in Frank Pierce Jones as the expanded spatial awareness. And I think he understood that when you don't focus directly on the thing you're trying to do, but you keep this expanded field of awareness, then you can actually work directly on it because you're not interfering in it. And so that to me is the key with coming back to working on breathing, is that if one can stay, mind to the brain and look out, and then you can just watch your breathing doing its own thing. And then you can say things like, then, just let the out breath be longer, and then just wait and let the in breath happen by itself. It's the process Jessica Wolf teaches. She learned it from Carl Stow, but it is what Alexander was doing. It's in one of his articles in lectures. And I learned it from John Hunter, who I think picked up on it from singing techniques, because I think that method has been there in the singing world probably for a couple of 100 years as a way of deepening the breath. And through doing that, one can then allow something different to happen. So I teach that to pupils quite sort of, as an ABC, as it were, in about lesson 3, I teach them that. And then I see how far they want to run with it. And some of them really take to that and want to explore it, and others of them, yes, but my shoulder hurts. So, okay, let's work with some pulls to the arms, but let's keep coming back to the breathing so you don't do too much here. And so it's very much is an interaction between myself and the pupil. And it is pupil-led to a degree, but I am teaching them different techniques that they can take home, and I see what they gel with. Some people aren't ready for the pulls for a long time because their system is just too wired, they're too anxious, they're too keen to get it right, and the pulls are not right for somebody who's like that. But somebody who's really into fitness work and really wanting to build strength, or somebody who has really, really painful shoulders. I've taught the pulls on lesson 1 to somebody with painful shoulders, and they've got release straight away. And it's a tool they can go away straight away and use. Does that, it's like having a bigger toolbox to play with. How does that fit, Arwen? And it's a very, toolbox is not a word they would have used in the old days, but it's perhaps a more modern phrase. How does that sound?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It sounds a little bit like how people sometimes describe jazz, where maybe you have a set of rules, and then you can improvise within those rules. So if we change the rules to framework.
I like that. That's a nice analogy. Yes, thank you. No, that's very much it. Vanessa, I see your hand up. Hello.
Penelope, I was really curious about your experience with Miss Goldie and discovering new procedures you had never seen before. Can you speak a little bit more about specifics that you're saying you did shoulder procedures you had never done before? Can you speak more about that?
Yes. The shoulder one wasn't so much a procedure. It was just that she took my shoulder much more forwards than anyone had ever done. And she brought my elbow right round, and then she would bring my hand then back in the other direction. And then she wanted me to be able to put my hand on my knee, and my wrist would promptly collapse. And she would tell me off and start all over again and bring my back up and my elbow out and this round and this round. And I mean, I now understand it as the deep back line of the arm, that she's opening out the back of the arm here. She's also opening out the front down to the wrist. And with this ulnar deviation, that we now know to call it, you know, when you turn that way up, that's the position. But to start with, I mean, she was doing these incredibly strong moves to bring me there. It was a long time before I could sit with my hands on my knees in that way that we all know, but that where my arms were supporting the back. My arms weren't dragging on the back as they had been. She saw my shoulders as having been too released, because everyone had been saying, release your shoulders, release your arms. She wanted them all to hold much more tone. And it was a very, very strong procedure. She would not do hands on back of the chair with me for the reason, Arwen, I did ask her and she said, you're not ready for that. And she never did do that with me. And now I, you know more about my arms. Oh, thank you, Glenna. So good you could be here for a while. Thank you. Yes, I understand now why she wouldn't do that. There was another one, which was her own procedure, which was she would get me standing up and she would get me to lift one heel and then lift my foot out to the side just to take a wider stance, and then lift it back again. And I think when I did it, I would let one hip go out and I'd collapse a little, and she'd tell me off furiously and she'd pull me up firmly and say, no, not your thing. And she'd keep going up. And every time, again, it was a couple of years before I could do it, before I could maintain that tone. She was building this tone throughout my body until I could lift a foot out to the side and lift it back again. And I think there she was working on the lateral line of the body. Lifting back in the chair is a technique they were using in the first training course. And it's interesting, actually, because I think that very first training course was doing these much stronger physical procedures, lifting back in the chair where you put the hands either side and you lift yourself back. But again, it takes incredible tone across the shoulders and the torso to do it well. Going up on the toes without swaying forwards was another one, and leaning back in the chair, which we'd done at my training course. But when we did it, we were just swung back and forth and we had to give our weight over. I was not to give her my weight. I was to keep that tone in the torso, and she would take me back, not touching the chair, and I'd be there leaning back at this angle. She'd then walk off to her clock, and she'd walk across very slowly, pick up her clock, look at it, put it down and walk back again. And she was making me use that tone. So it was much more waking up the strength of the body than we do nowadays. And I think all that was happening on that very first training course. How does that sound?
Thank you. That's so fascinating. Did she do much table work?
Nope. I was lucky. I got one table work turn from her. And a lot of people said, wow, you got one table turn. And she did it out of frustration because I wasn't understanding how my legs should connect to my back. She kept telling me my legs were heavy and dragging on my back. And one day she said, I shall just have to put you on the table. And so she did. And she worked pushing my legs back up into my back, lifting them up and connecting them up. And then I had to lower them slowly. And of course, I promptly released them down. No, that was wrong. They had to stay connected. And she taught me how to keep the legs to connected. And I can still remember the feel of that lesson. And I walked out and my legs felt like, you know, those dancing horses where the knees lift up. And I walked down the road feeling like a Lippesheimer horse and hoping nobody was looking. Yes, it was so different. But she didn't use table work because, again, she saw that was just a place where the pupil lets go. And she wanted to build strength, and strength is built in the chair. It's chair work that builds strength and integration in this way. And I hardly have used table work myself for the same reason. Yeah. which isn't to say, you know, I do have a table and I do use it. I've got a very, very tense, nervous, unaware pupil at the moment, and I can only work with her on the table. So when it's needed, it's there. But if a pupil's capable of working on the chair, you know, I use lying down sometimes to show some breathing stuff, but I don't do classic table work usually for that reason. So how does that sound? That's pretty shocking.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Matan, I see a hand up, and Sarah as well. But Matan,
Yes.
yes.
Hi, Penelope.
Hi.
I have to say, all this talk about Miss Goldie and even your impersonation of her sounds very much the same as my teacher, Galit.
Oh, yes.
Always talks about her. It's the same stuff, and so it made me laugh before. And I was just wondering, because we were talking before about teaching online, and I was wondering if you could maybe demonstrate how would you go about it, maybe in relation to your book, or maybe give an example of an exercise or something.
Sure. So the first key to working online is absolutely that anything I'm asking the pupil to do, same as I would in the room, is I have to be doing it myself. Because otherwise I'm just giving instructions and I might as well be a physio, you know, take your leg here, put your head there. But when I am working it through myself at the same time, verbalizing it for the pupil, but also verbalizing it for myself, it means that my body can lead the process for them in the way it would if I had my hands on. And when you get this process going, there's a sort of resonance that happens on a good day anyway. I can't promise it happens all the time, but where you start actually knowing what's going on for the pupil. You know, suddenly my neck feels a bit tight. And, okay, right, that's their neck I'm picking up on. So it's exactly which you would feel if you had your hands on the person. You might pick it up in your hands, but does anyone else sometimes pick it up in their own necks? Do other people get that? Yeah, absolutely. And when you this resonance process is not dependent on hands. And Alexander used to look before he put his hands on. This is something that Erica Whitaker was very keen to tell us. He didn't just go over there and feel what was going on with his hands. He would stand back and he would look. And she said it was like he looked with his ears and heard with his eyes. It was his whole being that was taking in what was going on for the pupil, and then he would just instinctively know where his hands were needed. Tommy Thompson said when he was trained by Frank Pierce Jones, I think it was that was it? No, it was Frank Pierce Jones trained by AR, that's right. And Frank Pierce Jones said, you know, where should I put my hands? And AR said, put them where they're needed. You know, you stand back and you just somehow know. And so again, when you embody in yourself, you then start to make this connection to the pupil and you know what they need. And sometimes, you know, I can be looking at somebody from here up and I know that their legs aren't connected. You know, how do we know this stuff? So we're beyond science here, where science hasn't caught up with this stuff yet. I use lots of coming to quiet. Shall we do a coming to quiet game together? And then we'll get a sense of that. So I want you to imagine there's a feather on your nose and it's going out and it's touching what you see. If you just look out into your room at this point and let that feather, it's an extendable feather, and it's extending out to touch what you're seeing, and it's tickling it. And so there's a space that the feather is measuring the space between you and what you're looking at. So you start to come into relationship with what you're looking at. You're one end of the feather and the object is at the other end of the feather, and the information from the object is coming up to your eyes. So you're receiving it with both eyes. Your attention and both your eyes are on the same point. So you're really coming present to what you're seeing. And if you then bring that feather actually through to the back of the brain where the visual cortex is, you brought it through the head. And so you might find that actually wakes up your peripheral vision as well. So because we're not just funneling down to the object we're looking at, but we're looking across the whole space, we've got a sense of the whole room around us as we're looking. So there's this much bigger space, the context in which the object is seated, and in which we are seated. And then if you just let your eyes, let that feather sort of tickle across to the next object. And that feather, of course, is picking up not just the color and the light and the shade, but also the texture, the shape, the contour, the volume. You maybe get a sense of the weight of the object. There's so much more information about an object when you look in this, what one might call an artistic way. It's the way an artist has to see in order to really recreate an object on the page. So just letting your eyes track along, again, being aware if your eyes want to jump along like a little grasshopper, or whether they want to stop like a snail and go to sleep, put their head back in their shell, and your eyes glaze. So notice whether they want to jump or glaze or fix, and just keep tracking them along, because that's what the relaxed eye does. The tense eye either, say, jumps or glazes or fixes, but the relaxed eye can track along, taking in that information, not just about the objects, but about the space between the objects, so that everything just comes into this quiet, present relationship. And as you do this, perhaps you're aware of it having a gentle, subtle effect on your nervous system. And if you track the eyes to the side, you'll notice that your head will turn, because the neck will reorganize itself following the intent of the eyes. And so you can take your head on a journey by tracking your eyes along, following your nose feather, brushing along things, and just go for a little journey, and your head will follow wherever you go. And you're taking in your room, taking in the beauty of it, the colors of it, coming present to it. Anyone noticing that changing their selves? Anyone notice what's happening there? Anyone like to comment on what's happening there? Annabelle.
Just expansion is what, and depth. Also, I can see better. My eyesight has deteriorated really badly in lockdown.
Yes, and it wakes the eyes up again. Yeah,
Wakes the eyes
lovely. Yeah, yes, because the eyes are very much like the body. You can use them well, you can use them badly. And if Bates's hypothesis was the same as Alexander. Anyone else like to comment on what happened there? Anita again, yes.
I have a sense of being able to stay with myself when I'm also out there. I don't have to go toward what I'm looking at.
That's beautiful. That's absolutely what we need in order to teach. Yes. Thank you. Meredith. You're muted, Meredith. Can you unmute yourself? If you'll find the mute button, say bottom left, that's it.
Yeah, I couldn't see myself on the gallery view, so okay. I really enjoy being aware of the space between me and my room and my environment, and it just reminded me of the snowfall that we just had here at my house, and I think that's the reason why I like snow as well, because it marks the space in all these different levels between me and what I'm seeing through to the other thing. Whereas and I think that's the one of the qualities of snow that I like, and it's that idea of sensing the space and therefore my relationship to my environment.
Yes. And how does that change your nervous system?
I don't know about how to answer in terms of my nervous system, but the expansive awareness, and which includes myself. So
Yeah.
therefore the relationship between myself and my environment, I don't know how to answer in terms of nerves, but it makes me feel more alive.
Lovely.
But not in an anxious way or anything, but just like, oh, okay, here I am,
Yes.
and here's my world, you know.
Lovely. And one of the phrases that Goldie used a lot was she wanted one to come to quiet, but she wanted one to be quiet and alive.
Yes.
She wanted that quiet to be a fully alive state, not an asleep trance state. And so often for a lot of people, stop is a let go, and she wanted it to be, you know, very much more vibrant than that.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Anyone notice that they came to a calmer place in themselves doing that work? Yeah, a few people noticed that. Lily, do you want to comment quickly?
But it's more quiet, more peace, and more contentment. Like nothing has to change, and it's okay if it does change. And I have a question about one of the details. I find myself wanting to put the feather coming from here instead of here. And I wonder what you think about alternate ways of where the feather can begin, or if this is definitely the best place, you know.
Play with it, see what you discover.
Yeah.
This one is probably more bringing it in as the eyes leading. I think I like the nose also because it brings in the digestive system, which is our primary nervous system, and it brings in the which I think holds the intuition, our interoception, our drive of what we want to do. And so I think, you know, if we just lead with the eyes, we lead the back of the body with the eyes, but the front of the body, I think, is led with the nose. And that's my own take on it. Something different changes when one also brings in the nose. So play around, see what you discover. There is no right answer, I don't think.
Okay.
Let's come back to Matan's question of how to use this online, because the first thing one has to do in any lesson, whether it's online or in person, is actually bring the person to a place of quiet, this quiet, alive place where they come fully present and from where their nervous system is receptive to change. Because if they've, you know, had a busy day at school and, oh yes, let's do some physical work, let's get my neck free, you're not going to touch them at any deeper level. You've got to bring them to this quiet place first so that they can come into this much more responsive, adaptive place where you start touching into the nervous system. And that's all autonomic nervous system, bringing them out of the sympathetic down into the parasympathetic, for those who know that language, because only in the parasympathetic are we really self-aware. And people talking there about how when the space comes, you know, suddenly I'm there too. And then we're self-aware, and then we're aware of ourselves in relation. And then we can come much more proprioceptively aware. And then what the directions we then give will actually really touch us at the physical level, but also at this more nervous system level, which is the level we're always trying to engage. Does that make sense, Matt? And as a starting point of, I've lost Matt. Where is he?
Oh yes, definitely. It makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much.
Good.
That was beautiful, and I have come to quiet.
Does Galit say that one? Galit was at Misha's with me, you know, as well. We were at Misha's together as well. So
Oh, that's wonderful.
Sarah, you've had your hand up a long time. You want to ask a question?
Yes, but it's just going back to structure again. And I'm just impatient, I guess, although less so after that exercise, about knowing what you plan to teach on the course.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, on the course, we will work systematically through the book, and you've got a copy, haven't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, you know, part one of the book is very much setting the basics. So first we have to know about just basic biomechanical balance of the head neck and how to get that head neck back relationship for starters. That's chapter 3. Chapter 2 sets the scene of right left brain, which again is really introducing that sense of only when we come into that spatial awareness, into that right brain side, do we really contact the body. And without that, we're just in the map. Think of left right brain like the map and the landscape. You can travel from A to B using the map. And if you only use your Google phone, you never see the landscape at all. And if you use a proper map, you might know where the rivers are and where the mountains are, and you know where the crossroads is and where there's a church there. But it doesn't tell you anything about how green the grass is, what the mountain smells like, whether the birds are singing, the experience of the journey. And that's the difference. The left brain gives us a map, the right brain gives us the experience. And again, we have to take pupils out of the left brain into the right brain, but also keep their left brain engaged so they can process and reason, and we're really helping those two sides of the brain link up, I think. So then chapter 4 introduces all that sort of how to get embodied and more on left and right and so on. And the eye work we've just done, coming to quiet. Chapter 5 is all about the nervous system, why that's important. Chapter 6 is natural breathing. And again, learning to let that body come to quiet and let the breathing organize itself. And muscles start to come into play that we've never experienced before. And I like to do all that before I go in with Jando's pulls, so that people aren't just, pushing themselves around. They get the sense of how the body is actually trying to self-organize itself, so that when we put in that more active physical work, we're putting it onto a basis of already having this sense of quiet and self-organization. And then the pulls and other, not all the chapters are pulls. There's always also the work I developed is leading with the fingers, that let spatial awareness come in with the arms, thinking of positions, directions, that bring the muscle trains alive. And so it's all built on this basis of always we're getting to the nervous system, but what the pulls are doing, they work, it's two sides of the same coin, because the pulls are then pulling out deep tensions, which actually then bring the system even quieter so that it can come more present, so that it can come more embodied. And then one can, the breathing can get deeper, and then we can get deeper with the pulls. And it's a spiral. And so we're working with it all as we progress through the book. Chapter 7 is the upper body pulls, the lower body pulls. Chapter 8 is the legs. Chapter 9, we get into the upper body. Chapter 10, we go into the core. What is the psoas? Which again is a whole area that never got discussed, the pelvic floor and the psoas and the core muscles. And they're crucial. They're absolutely crucial. And they were part of Goldie's work. But back in 1910, you probably couldn't talk too much about the pelvic floor. And the psoas, I doubt, was even known at that point. So all that needs to be integrated into our modern work, and so on. And then the last part of the book, part 3, is what I call the pure Goldie work. It's the inhibition game, the kettle game, which I then do with a ball as well, to demonstrate this place of quiet aliveness, which is now being called tonic inhibition or adaptive inhibition. Inhibition is a state of quiet aliveness. And the science people, Tim Cacciatore, I've talked at length with him, and we've realized we're talking about the same thing here. Chapter 16 gets into, how movement really is organized, the modern theories of how movement actually is brought about. How can my dog walk down the path without stepping in the dog poo? He can't see where his back feet are. There's so much more about the self-organizing. Chapter 17 gets into the voice and deeply into the intelligence of the body, taking the voice into the intelligence of the body, which is also absolutely crucial for working online and indeed for any work. Because if I've got a really harsh voice, I'm not going to be bringing my people to quiet. I need a resonant voice to calm their system, which might be, some people need me to come to the same calm you would use with a newborn baby before they can actually feel safe enough to start on the work. And the voice is such a powerful part of that. It's a very important part of the work that often gets neglected. Chapter 18 is how we take all that into putting hands. So how does that sound, Sarah?
So you work from chapter to chapter,
Yep.
or a couple of chapters in a session?
Half a chapter in a session. They're dense. Yeah, I started off trying to do a chapter in a session, and I've gone to half a chapter. It's enough.
And how much is practical? How much is theory?
Yes. So what we do is within the group, on the first session, we organize everybody to have a study buddy. We pair everybody off. And then, so each 2 weeks, the homework, as it were, is to read that, maybe 10 pages, and then play with it yourself, because as you know, the book alternates the theory, and any theory given is taken straight into practical work. So because theory without practical is a waste of time. It's just ideas. It's going to flow away. You've got to take it straight into practical. That's also why I wrote the book in informal language, so that you can flow easily between the science and the practical, science and practical. Whereas if I'd written it in technical language, which the publishers initially said, this is far too informal. Yes, but that just puts people in left brain. I want, that's why the story's there, to keep it flowing, to keep it something that can be taken in. So people work on it for themselves, and then they get together with their study buddy, and one plays teacher and one plays pupil, and they have a go at talking each other through the procedures. And that way they get to learn how they work on somebody else. They get to practice it. They get to language it, because again, most of us weren't taught how to language the technique. We were taught how to do it on somebody, but not how to verbalize it. So that's a huge part, is learning to verbalize it, and recognizing when one strays into unuseful phrases. So again, you're learning to observe the people. Another thing we didn't tend to learn. We learned how to observe through our hands and not through watching somebody. What phrases brings them alive, what phrases switches them off, what phrases throws their head. We're watching all the time and learning how to interact with the people in this much more dynamic way, and then getting them to feed back, because you do something nice to somebody's head, whether online or with your hands, and you say, how is that? And they go, okay, tell me a bit more. Yes, it's nice. Yes, and what happened? Oh, my neck lengthened. Oh, there we go. And again, when pupils verbalize their own process in that way, it really helps them to know what happened and helps them to take it deeper into their understanding. And again, this is very much a modern take. I think that wasn't done 100 years ago. So in the sessions themselves, we do as we're doing today, we ask questions, but I try and make sure that at least a third and probably a half of the session, we're actually working through the explorations together, so that we're working through them in real time. And people I can be watching their breathing, getting feedback on them, or watching exactly how they are doing the pulls, what's the orientation of it, picking up problems there and then. And actually we're developing the work together through that as well. It's amazing what comes up, and I'm taking notes from these sessions as well, when a new take, a new way of languaging it, or a new way of understanding it. Someday there'll be a second edition of the book, and these groups will be half the process. So we're all in a development process together, and it can be very exciting, great fun. How does that sound? Not too academic?
Yeah, it's always good to pin reasoning behind the work, I think.
Yes.
And have the why explained. So yeah, it sounds good.
It's this balance, isn't it, between the why and actually keeping it practical. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Julie, you've had your hand up a long time.
Thank you. I noticed a question in the chat and was very interested and kind of wanted to wave my hand, but now she's got her thing up, but it's about hypermobility.
Oh yes, thank you. I didn't see that. Thank you, Eugene.
And I'm particularly interested in this myself, and in that I'm having a fairly major problem right at the moment that's connected to my hypermobility.
Yes. I think the work is brilliant for hypermobility. The classic Alexander table work is about the worst thing I think one can do for a hypermobile person, because it's pulling the arm out, it's inviting them to release, and people who are hypermobile have said it takes me apart. Goldie at one point was actually not just taking my arm that way, she was taking me that way. She was actually pushing the arm back. And I've already described she was pushing my leg back. We want to be, the way the pulls work is, you know, when a teacher pulls you, they are doing one pull at a time. But the amazing way Jando has put it together, you don't do one pull. You do a pull in that direction and a pull in that direction and a pull maybe in that direction. So you're actually always opening out your whole tensegrity structure with the pulls. And in doing this, you're bringing the muscles underneath, because a hypermobile person, some of the muscles are too lax, aren't they? But others are very, very tight. So for classically, I think some joints are very loose and other joints are very tight. So there's an imbalance there. And we want the tight ones to open up so that the loose ones can come back into play, because muscles work like zippers. You know, a zipper, you know, if the zipper is unconnected at the bottom, it can't zip. Once it gets to the top, it can't go any further. There's an active place in the middle where you can zip, and muscles work like that. But when we're out of balance, the muscle is either over contracted and has no power, or it's too loose and cannot power. And the whole point of Alexander's point about bringing people into mechanical advantage is it's the place in which the tight ones can free off and the loose ones can actually re-engage. And that's what the hypermobile person needs to do, is to re-engage the loose ones. I had a very hypermobile woman on one of the very first workshops I did locally, where I was working with this stuff in a local group, and her shoulder would dislocate at the drop of a hat. And within about 2 or 3 sessions, it had stopped happening. And by the end of the course that I did, which I think was 12 sessions, she said, well, it's just stopped happening. And her pain levels were way, way down. So I think this work is very exciting for hypermobile people. How does that sound, Julie, and you, Chia, as well? Sorry, I didn't notice your question earlier.
Well, I wish I could have accessed it myself by now, but it sounds encouraging. Thank you.
Yes, you're very welcome. You, Chia, do you want to comment any further on that?
I think about like the tone that you say, like building strength and the tone, and I think I've been working a little bit with Alexander technique teacher, and I realized like the shoulder dropping and heaviness of the shoulder that you mentioned earlier sounds pretty similar. So I just seems like finding relationship between and then the connection that's your book is about, and I think that might be helpful.
Yes, absolutely. It's all about connection and relationship, isn't it? And yeah. Goldie hated the word release. You know, if I said I was releasing my shoulder, I got told off. Let's do a very quick game on that. I know we're almost out of time. Just put your shoulder up in the air. Everybody, just put your shoulder up in the air. This one isn't in the book. And now just drop it down. Just release your shoulder. And now put it up again. And this time I want you to think, I can do less with my shoulder. I can do less with my shoulder. But we're not actually letting it drop. You're just going to let it self-organize in its own time. I can do less with my shoulder. I can do less with my shoulder. And just see what happens. I can do less with my shoulder. 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 Okay, you're all pretty well back to where you started. But is it different from first time round? What's happened? What do you notice? Julie.
There were numerous responses, some in my neck, some in my mid-lower back. it wasn't just the shoulder.
Yes.
It was much more than.
Yes. And is the whole body now supporting the shoulder better than it was?
Well, I started taking notes, so it might not be, but excuse my end gaining. But the potential of it is certainly there, yes.
Yes, yes, because when you release the shoulder, you collapse all the muscles around it. But
Oh
the
yeah, I just
that's done
it
has
went-
actually woken up muscles in the back, woken up muscles in the neck, and now the shoulder is held within a bigger context. And that's absolutely what Goldie was doing. If I, it was her, she didn't use let the neck be free, let her go forward. Now, if it was not the head back, she would put me somewhere, and my job was not to let it go. My job was to keep that tone going, not by doing, but just inviting it to keep going. It's a very different process. Okay. So we're nearly out of time. We are out of time. So the books club starts on the 31st of January, and it runs on Mondays at 5 o'clock UK time, and then it's alternate Mondays. Anyone who is drawn to do it but can't do that time, there have been quite a few people who have done it, because this is the 4th group I've started. The other 3 groups are all going swimmingly, but there are some people I never see because they can't do the time, and they still have their study buddy. They're still part of the Facebook group. They can send their questions in to me by email, and they're still working away, and they still are participating. They're getting all the background material for the club, so they're still getting the whole process. They're just not able to attend in person because all the sessions are recorded, so it doesn't matter. If you have to miss a session, you can still stay with the process. Yes, I keep the price very low. It's because I know a lot of teachers struggle for money. So I've done, rather than a one-off fee, I've done it as a subscription payment. So it's €25 a month, or 20 for anyone who's hard up. It's absolutely your choice which level you pay at. And there's no upfront commitment, so you can have a go. You can stay in there for a few months and go, yes, this is me. I'm staying with it to the end. We've had a few people drop out, not very many, but some people, family commitments take over, or they realize that process doesn't work for them or whatever, and that's fine too. So it's a very fluid process. So does anyone want to ask any more questions? Sarah, yes. You're muted still.
Yeah, so the Facebook part of it, what's that involved? I suppose I don't
not much actually. Those who like Facebook, we have a group and people can put comments in the Facebook group. It's gone a bit quiet at the moment, but it's not obligatory. For people who don't like Facebook, don't worry. Yeah, I know you're not a Facebook person. It's not a problem. Yeah, not a problem there. Yeah, but some people like it. Soren, you're muted.
Is it only for teachers, this group, or is it also for students?
It is for teachers, it's for students, and it is also for members of the public who would like to join in. And so if some of you who are here are not teachers, we have people who have been taking lessons for a long time and are thinking about training. I also have a few people who, are there because they're a singer or just very interested in the technique. And what we do is we pair them with another teacher as a practice pupil. So they get to be a practice pupil for a teacher, because it's always good to take a practice pupil as well, because languaging it and working in this way is a bit unfamiliar. And it's great to practice before one goes out on paying pupils. Some people are great to just leap in and start playing with it all with their paying pupils, and other people want practice first. So very much encourage people to take these. So there's a place for members of the public as well. Yes, does that answer your question? So people of all levels. I mean, I've got teachers who have had 50 years experience and people who've had like 3 lessons. So there's the whole span there. And it's lovely to have the whole span, because we get to benefit from the experience, and we also get to benefit from the inexperience in the questions those people ask. So, yeah. Anyone else want to ask a question before we finish? Julie, did you want to ask another question?
How long is the session on Mondays?
Oh yes, it's an hour and a half. And again, if one can't stay the full time, you can catch up on the recording later. Some people, can never get in for half an hour. The beauty of Zoom is it doesn't disturb the group with people coming in and out in the way that if you're sitting in a room, people are, squeezing past chairs. It's really fine to slip in, slip out, and people's dogs bomb the session, and their children bomb the session. And I mean, that's Zoom, isn't it? We get to see into each other's lives. So it's very forgiving process, and people with small children in the background can work with their camera off and so on, and still be present. Yeah. Any other questions? I really want people to be able to join in who can. Soren, do you still have your hand up, or is that just yeah? Okay. Any other questions before we finish? Okay. So I will send you all the recording, and I'll also send you a link to the landing page of the Book Study Club for if you would like to take a look, and also if you have a friend you want to do it with. A lot of people bring a friend themselves, actually, rather than be paired up with someone they don't know. They want to work with another teacher that they know, or a colleague, or so that's also an option, is people can bring their own study buddy. Lily, did you have a question there? No.
I did not. It was the reaction for hand clapping, and then
Okay.
a heart and a hand clap.
Do you want to talk briefly? You're actually a member of the club at the moment. Do you want to talk briefly about it?
I actually love it. Everything that Penelope has said is true. It's very flexible to meet whatever is happening in your life right now. One of the things I love about it, and you can tell this from our meeting today, is there's no judgment. You're free to be yourself and be wherever you are. And it's wonderfully supportive to go with the book, to hear Penelope put it in her own words besides the book, and to answer questions. And of course, classmates ask questions that you didn't even think of. So it's a wonderful learning tool, and very affordable also.
Thank you, Lily. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much for coming tonight, everybody. It's been great working with you all tonight. Barbara, I didn't say hello to you. Suzanne, hello. Yeah, and hopefully see you all one day soon. Hi, Matan. Yeah,
thank you.
See her.
Thank you very much. That was lovely.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucia.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, thank you, Kathy. And Kat too.
Come off.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi and bye.
Bye bye now. Oh, hi, Lucia. Can you stay 1 minute? Lucia?
I can, yes. I can
Thank
stay
you.
1 minute. I just